Before he was feared, before he was called a monster, he was just a boy who believed his heart had stopped beating, and his blood had turned to powder. That someone was stealing his organs. Richard Chase didn't want to kill, he wanted to survive, and in his twisted reality, drinking blood was the only cure. But behind those dead eyes wasn't just illness. There was something darker, something ancient, something hungry.
Before the world knew him as the Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Trenton Chase was just a boy. Born on May 23, 1950, in Santa Clara County, California, he entered a world already cracking at the seams. His parents' marriage was riddled with arguments, accusations, and chaos. His mother, Beatrice, often hurled strange and paranoid claims, once insisting her husband had hidden a woman in the bushes during a family camping trip. His father, meanwhile, was stern and prone to physical discipline. The home was a battleground, and young Richard absorbed every wound. By age 5, Richard was already showing disturbing signs. He wet the bed consistently, started fires, and tortured small animals, hallmarks of the infamous McDonald triad, often linked to future violent offenders. Still, to outsiders, he appeared somewhat normal. Over 60 children attended one of his early birthday parties. But behind closed doors, a monster was quietly growing. In high school, Richard's downward spiral began to accelerate. He was introduced to marijuana and LSD, drugs that likely exacerbated his already fragile mental state. He also discovered something that shattered him internally. He was impotent. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't sustain a physical relationship with women. This inability fueled an obsession with power, blood, and control. His first serious relationship ended when he couldn't perform sexually. Instead of dealing with it rationally, Richard convinced himself his blood wasn't circulating properly. He became obsessed with his body, often complaining that his heart had stopped or that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. He once shaved his head completely to watch his cranial bones move around. He was that convinced they were separating. In college, Richard failed to find purpose. He bounced between jobs, dropped out, and began living with roommates who quickly became unsettled by his behavior. He would walk around naked, high on drugs, and eventually barricaded himself in his room. Soon, even they left. His family didn't know what to do. His mother accused him of trying to control her mind. He believed she was poisoning him. Their fights were frequent and disturbing. His father thought he was lazy. His grandmother witnessed bizarre scenes, Richard standing on his head to get blood to his brain, talking to himself, or spending hours dissecting medical books, cutting out photos of organs and plastering them across his bedroom walls. By 1973, Richard had already killed his first cat. It wasn't just violence, it was envy. He had seen a story on TV about a cat receiving better medical treatment than he had. Furious, he ended the animal's life. His paranoia was escalating. He walked into hospitals claiming his heart had stopped. He begged his mother for help, saying he was dying. He was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Yet, after brief institutionalizations, doctors either overwhelmed or misguided allowed him to go home. His mother, dissatisfied with the side effects of his medication, weaned him off it. That decision would prove catastrophic. Left alone in his apartment, Richard began consuming raw rabbits, then dogs. He bought puppies only to kill and gut them, drinking their blood. Neighbors saw him walking aimlessly around with his mouth open, eyes hollow, his sanity clearly dissolving. In one chilling incident, he was found naked, drenched in blood, carrying a bucket with a liver inside. Authorities dismissed it as a case of stolen cow parts. No charges were filed. The signs were there, blinking like red warning lights. But no one stopped Richard Chase, and he was about to do something far worse than anyone could imagine. By late 1977, Richard Chase's mind was a fractured mirror of delusion and bloodlust. He believed his blood was turning to powder. He injected himself with rabbit blood. He thought Nazis, UFOs, and the mafia were conspiring to poison him. He started killing dogs to drink their blood, and eventually escalated to something far more terrifying: humans. He purchased a .22 caliber pistol in December 1977, lying on the form to bypass questions about mental illness. Almost immediately, he began firing the weapon inside his apartment, claiming he was shooting at voices. The walls were riddled with bullet holes. Then came the first murder. On December 29, 1977, Chase drove through a Sacramento neighborhood and randomly shot 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin, a father of two, as he was unloading groceries. It was a drive-by killing with no apparent motive. Police were baffled, but it was just the beginning. Over the next weeks, Chase began trying door handles. To him, an unlocked door meant an invitation, a locked one, a rejection. In one incident, he broke into a house, urinated on a baby's clothes, and defecated on the bed before leaving. In another, he set fire to drapes, convinced the homeowners were spying on him. On January 23, 1978, he found an open door. The victim was 22-year-old Teresa Wallen, 3 months pregnant. As she was taking out the trash, Chase entered. He shot her in the hand, then in the head, killing her. What followed was monstrous. He mutilated her body with a butcher's knife, removed her organs, drank her blood using a yogurt cup, and stuffed feces down her throat. Her husband returned home to find her body. Police were stunned. The brutality defied comprehension. But there was more to come. Just 4 days later, on January 27th, Chase entered the home of 38-year-old Evelyn Mirith. Inside were Evelyn, her 6-year-old son Jason, her 22-month-old nephew David, and her friend Dan Meredith. Chase shot Dan near the door. He shot Evelyn, Jason, and David one by one. Then, in a frenzy, he mutilated Evelyn's body, drank her blood, and performed necrophilic acts. He took David's body with him. When police arrived, they found a scene of absolute carnage. Blood stained the carpets. A tub was filled with blood. Jason, dressed for a day trip, lay dead. Evelyn's corpse was mutilated beyond recognition. David was missing, and hopes for finding him alive were already fading. Fingerprints, footprints, and witness reports led investigators to Chase. He was seen wearing the same orange ski jacket during both killings. An old classmate had even encountered him days before the murders. He was disheveled, smelled of blood, and had sunken eyes and yellow crust on his mouth. Police arrested Chase outside his apartment after pretending to leave. Inside, they found a horror house. Blood on the floor, walls, dishes, and furniture. Animal collars, rotting organs. The body of little David Ferreira was later found decapitated in a box in the trash. When interrogated, Chase rambled about Italians framing him, about being poisoned, about UFOs. He claimed he was innocent, except for a few dogs. He was put on trial in 1979 for 6 counts of murder. His defense attempted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. But prosecutors argued that Chase knew what he was doing. He brought gloves, he fled the scenes, he lied to cover his tracks. It was premeditated madness. He was found guilty. The sentence, death.
Experts studying Richard Chase's crimes agree on one thing: this was not just mental illness. This was unfiltered, untreated psychosis given time to metastasize. FBI profiler Robert Ressler interviewed Chase after his conviction. What he encountered was a man, completely detached from reality. Chase rambled about soap dish poisoning, Nazi UFOs, and a Star of David etched on his forehead. He handed wrestler macaroni and cheese from his pants, claiming prison staff were trying to poison him. It was a mind lost in a maze of terror and hallucination. Chase believed his blood was disintegrating. He believed that by drinking the blood of animals and, eventually people, he was keeping himself alive. But his delusions weren't enough to fully excuse the brutality. He planned, he armed himself, he locked his doors, and he tried to escape capture. The justice system wrestled with the decision. Was he insane? Or just evil? Ultimately, he was deemed sane enough to face a gas chamber. But Chase would never see that day. On December 26, 1980, he was found dead in his cell at San Quentin, an apparent suicide. He had hoarded Cinequan, an antidepressant, and overdosed. Near his body, pages filled with symbols, gibberish, and notes about death were found. What drove him to kill? Experts point to a toxic combination: a broken family, untreated schizophrenia, drug abuse, isolation, and violent delusions. But perhaps the most chilling fact is how many times the system failed to intervene, how many warnings were ignored. The Vampire of Sacramento wasn't just a killer. He was a catastrophic failure of human care.
All right, so we're diving into some seriously heavy stuff today.
Yeah, this one is
Definitely not for the faint of heart.
right. We've got a lot of listener submitted stuff to go through.
And a good amount of it
Yeah.
focuses on Richard Trenton Chase.
Richard Trenton Chase, yeah. Probably better known as
Yeah, give us some of the nicknames.
the Vampire of Sacramento,
Okay.
the Dracula Killer, the Vampire Killer. He had
A few.
a lot of nicknames, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, those nicknames kind of hint at the nature of his crimes.
Right, and these are some really
Shocking.
brutal crimes. We're talking serial killings,
Yeah.
cannibalism, necrophilia.
And this all took place in Sacramento, California.
Right.
In a very short period of time, really.
Yeah, between December 1977 and January 1978.
So, we're not just here to recount the events, right? We want to kind of go deeper.
Right.
And look at what happened, what are the details, but also try to understand, what led up to it.
Exactly. Try to get into the background.
Yeah. Was there anything in his background that might explain any of this?
Yeah, what went wrong?
Yeah. So let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah, let's go back to his early life.
Richard Chase was born on May 23rd, 1950
Okay.
in Santa Clara County, California. And
Right from the start, it sounds like he had a difficult
yeah,
family environment.
a lot of tension. Yeah.
A lot of tension, a lot of arguments between the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mother, she makes some pretty serious accusations against the father.
Yeah, I mean, accusing her husband of drugging her and having affairs, even during a family camping trip.
Wow.
It's hard to imagine, what kind of effect that would have on a young child.
Right, just that instability.
Yeah, and there's also mention of physical discipline from the father.
Which, they say it wasn't uncommon back then.
Right, it was a different time.
But it still contributes to this image of, not a great home life.
Yeah, a potentially pretty volatile situation.
Right.
And then there's this thing that keeps coming up. It's called the McDonald triad.
Okay, I'm not familiar.
It's a theory in psychology that links 3 specific behaviors in childhood
Okay.
to an increased risk of violence later in life.
Okay, so what are those 3 behaviors?
So, cruelty to animals,
Okay.
obsession with fire setting,
Uh-huh.
and bedwetting
Okay.
past a certain age.
Past the age where it's
Normal, exactly. And the sources we're looking at, they suggest that Chase showed signs of all 3 of these by the age of 5.
Wow, so very young.
Yeah.
That's pretty disturbing.
It is. But what's really interesting is that, if you look at his early school life, he actually seemed pretty normal.
So how do we reconcile that with the McDonald triad?
Yeah, there's even this story about a birthday party he had when he was a kid with over 60 guests.
So he had friends, he was socializing.
Seems like it, yeah.
That's a strange contrast.
It is. It's a huge contrast.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, I mean, was this stuff kind of hidden, or did it just not really manifest until later?
Yeah. Well, I mean, mental illness is complex.
Right.
And it can be really unpredictable.
Yeah, it doesn't always show up right away.
Exactly.
Sometimes it takes a trigger,
Yeah.
some kind of stressor, or it could be biological.
Right.
Something changes in the brain.
And then, when you get into his teenage years, that's when we start to see more significant changes.
Yeah. What happens then?
Well, for one, there's the drug use.
Okay.
Marijuana and LSD are specifically mentioned.
So pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah. And then another really, really key event is that he discovers he's impotent.
Oh, wow. And he's just a teenager when this happens.
Yeah, and you can imagine what kind of impact that has on a young guy.
Absolutely. That's a huge blow to your self-esteem.
Right, and his relationships, too.
Makes sense.
He had a girlfriend
Okay.
named Libby Christopher, and, the sources suggest that his impotence played a role in their breakup.
Yeah, that's got to be tough to deal with at that age.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, or maybe disturbing is a better word, that this is when we start to see some really unusual behaviors emerge.
Like what?
Well, for example, he gets this delusion that he's a member of the James Younger gang.
Who are they?
They were a famous outlaw gang in the 1800s.
Okay, so he's kind of romanticizing this outlaw lifestyle.
Yeah, it seems like he really believes it.
To what extent?
He even goes to the point of, altering photos
Wow.
and asking his mom for specific clothes.
So he's really trying to embody this persona.
Yeah, and then there's this other strange habit he develops.
Okay.
He would sleep completely naked
Okay.
with the heater on full blast.
Like uncomfortably hot.
Yeah, and the windows wide open.
That's really bizarre.
It is. And keep in mind, he was popular in high school. He was considered clean cut.
So this is quite a change.
A huge change. And as he becomes an adult, he becomes much more withdrawn.
Okay.
His appearance changes. He's much more unkempt.
So these outward signs are starting to reflect some inner turmoil.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what about school? How's he doing academically?
Well, his grades start to slip.
Okay.
And eventually he drops out of college.
So he's really struggling to function.
Yeah. And then in his early 20s, he develops severe hypochondria.
What does that look like?
He's got all these bizarre complaints about his health.
Like what kinds of complaints?
Well, he thinks his heart keeps stopping.
Okay.
He believes that his pulmonary artery has been stolen.
Stolen?
Yeah, literally surgically removed.
That's a pretty extreme delusion.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there.
What else is he thinking?
Okay, so he believes he can absorb vitamin C
Okay.
just by holding oranges to his head.
Through his skull.
Yeah, and he's convinced that his cranial bones are moving.
Like shifting around.
Yeah, so he shaves his head.
To see them move.
Yeah, so he can observe it better.
Wow, that's really disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, these aren't just little quirks. This is a serious disconnect from reality.
Absolutely.
And it affects his whole life.
Like how?
He can't hold down a job. He bounces from one short-term menial job to another.
And the drug use probably doesn't help.
Right. It definitely exacerbates things.
And what about his living situation during this time?
He shared an apartment with some roommates for a while,
Okay.
and they described him as being high all the time, walking around naked, and even barricading himself in his room.
Like he was afraid of something.
Yeah, it seems like he was terrified of being attacked or snuck up on.
Wow, so this paranoia is really starting to take hold.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even simple things like playing music cause problems.
Yeah, his roommates complained about him playing the conga drums.
It sounds like he was becoming increasingly isolated and difficult to live with.
Right, and on top of all this, his family life was still incredibly unstable.
So the issues with his parents were still going on.
Yeah, they actually ended up getting divorced in June of 1972.
Wow.
And he's constantly fighting with his mother.
What are they fighting about?
Well, he starts to believe that she's poisoning him.
It's like he's mirroring her accusations against his father from when he was a kid.
Exactly. It's a really striking parallel.
Yeah, that's fascinating, but also really sad.
It is, and it's around this time that he gets arrested for DUI in Utah.
Okay.
And while he's in jail, he claims that he was gassed.
By the guards.
Yeah, and he wants to sue.
So his paranoia is extending beyond his family.
Absolutely. But his father steps in,
Okay.
bails him out, talks him out of the lawsuit.
It seems like his father was trying to protect him.
Yeah, but also maybe not fully understanding the extent of his problems.
Right, maybe just seeing it as, youthful recklessness.
Yeah, and Chase is constantly going back and forth between his parents' houses.
So he doesn't really have a stable place to live.
No, and there's this really sad detail where he's asked to leave his father's house,
Okay.
and he just stands there.
Like frozen.
Yeah, staring blankly at the property.
And his father just thinks he's being lazy.
Yeah, he doesn't see it as a sign of mental illness.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, and then things escalate even further when he physically attacks his mother.
Physically attacks her.
Yeah, he hits her with a phone during an argument.
Wow, that's serious.
She calls the police,
Okay.
but she doesn't press charges.
It sounds like the family was really at a loss.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly didn't know how to handle this.
And it doesn't seem like they were getting him the help he needed.
Right.
So what happens next?
Well, after that incident, he goes to live with his grandmother in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And this actually happens twice. for extended periods.
So the grandmother is kind of stepping in to help.
Yeah, and she becomes a really key observer of his decline.
What kind of decline are we talking about?
Well, he gets fired from a job driving mentally disabled children.
Why was he fired?
He wasn't taking care of the bus, not cleaning it, not checking the oil.
So basic responsibilities.
Yeah, and his behavior at his grandmother's house is getting increasingly strange.
What's he doing?
He spends most of the day in bed.
Okay.
Then he's wandering around at night.
He thinks someone's coming in through his window.
So the paranoia is still there.
Yeah, and he's talking to himself a lot.
Okay.
Even standing on his head.
Why is he doing that?
He claims it improves his blood flow,
Wow.
and he gets another job at a paint store,
Okay.
and he's fired within days.
So he can't hold down any job.
Nope.
It sounds like his mental state is really deteriorating.
His grandmother definitely noticed. She
Yeah.
said he was becoming really thin and pale.
And his hygiene was probably not great.
No, it wasn't.
So then he returns to Sacramento in the summer of 1973.
Right.
And what happens then?
Well, this is when his behavior gets even more disturbing.
Oh no, what does he do?
He starts cutting out pictures of organs from a medical textbook,
Organs?
like hearts, lungs, livers.
And he's pasting them all over his walls.
Yeah, all over his bedroom.
That's really creepy.
It is. And then he calls an ambulance
For what?
for no
A
reason.
fake emergency.
Yeah, there's nothing actually wrong with him. So he's becoming increasingly preoccupied with his body.
Yeah, and he's also starting to realize that something is seriously wrong.
Okay.
He begs his mother to help him with his medical problem.
He's still convinced that he's physically ill,
Yeah.
and she takes him to some doctors.
Yeah, she takes him to 2 different doctors,
Okay.
but he's not happy with their diagnoses.
They're probably telling him it's psychological,
Right.
and he's not accepting that.
Exactly.
So he's in complete denial.
Yeah, and then they see Dr. Ansel.
Oh,
And Dr. Ansel is the first one to really recognize the true nature of Chase's distress.
okay.
He diagnoses him with a psychiatric disturbance of major proportion.
Wow. So finally, someone is acknowledging the mental illness.
Yes, but unfortunately, things continue to spiral.
What happens next?
Well, in 1973, he kills his cat.
Kills his cat.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awful.
It's terrible, and you know what's even more disturbing?
What?
He did it after seeing a news story about advanced medical treatment for animals?
And he thought he deserved that same level of care.
It seems that way, yeah.
Wow, that's a really distorted sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and it's a huge red flag.
Absolutely.
And this is what finally leads to his first hospitalization.
Okay, so he's committed.
Yeah, in December of 1973.
What are the circumstances?
Well, he shows up at the emergency room with a whole list of physical complaints.
Like what?
He says he's having trouble breathing. He thinks his blood has stopped flowing.
Yeah.
He claims he's experienced cardiac arrest. And he even believes that he's lost his pulmonary vein.
This is getting more and more delusional.
Yeah, and his physical appearance is also concerning.
How so?
They describe him as tense, nervous, and wild-eyed.
Okay.
He's clearly not doing well.
And what's the diagnosis?
They diagnose him with acute paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay.
And they also think that drug-induced psychosis might be playing a role.
So a combination of factors, and,
Yeah.
and paranoid schizophrenia is particularly concerning because of the delusions and hallucinations.
Right, it can really warp a person's perception of reality.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing. His stay in the hospital is pretty short.
How come?
Well, his mother gets into a big confrontation with the staff.
Really?
Yeah, she's really aggressive.
And they discharge him because of that.
It seems that way, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
The doctor's report even refers to her as a so-called schizophrenic mother.
Wow, that's harsh.
It is, but it also highlights the really complicated family dynamics at play.
Right, there's clearly a lot of denial and misunderstanding going on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems like Chase isn't getting the support he needs.
So what happens after he's discharged?
Well, he starts taking medication,
Okay.
and for about 2 years, his mental health actually seems to improve.
Really?
Yeah, he gains some weight,
Okay.
and they give him an oxygen tank.
An oxygen tank.
Yeah, they think it might help with his anxiety or panic attacks.
Interesting.
But sadly, this period of stability doesn't last.
So he relapses.
Yeah.
What might have caused that?
Well, it's hard to say for sure,
Okay.
but a few things could have contributed.
Like what?
Well, for one, he might not have been taking his medication regularly.
That's a common problem with schizophrenia.
Right, especially if someone doesn't really understand their illness.
Or if they experience bad side effects.
Exact.
Okay, so that's one possibility.
Yeah, and then his mother claims that he started using drugs again.
Which would definitely destabilize him.
Absolutely.
But his father disagrees with that assessment.
Yeah, he doesn't think Chase was using drugs.
So again, we see this conflict within the family.
Right. They can't even agree on what's going on.
And it's important to remember that schizophrenia is a biological illness.
Right.
So even when someone is in remission, there's still that underlying vulnerability.
Exactly.
And any kind of stressor could trigger a relapse.
Okay, so his mom says he's using drugs again. His dad says he's not.
Right.
But regardless, his behavior is definitely getting worse.
What's he doing?
She hears him talking to himself more and more. He has trouble doing simple things, like signing his name.
So his cognitive abilities are declining.
Yeah, and he starts accusing his mom and his sister of controlling his mind.
The paranoia is getting worse.
Yeah, and then he starts getting physically aggressive with his mom again.
Oh, no.
There's one incident where he slacks her.
So things are really escalating.
Yeah, and his dad actually intervenes over the phone.
What does he do?
He tries to calm Chase down,
Okay.
but it just makes Chase even angrier.
He's completely losing control.
Yeah, he starts smashing things, breaking furniture.
It sounds like he needs to be hospitalized again.
He does, but before that happens, he moves into his own apartment.
Okay.
And this is when his behavior takes a really bizarre turn.
Okay, what does he do?
He starts buying live rabbits from a farm.
Live rabbits.
Yeah.
What's he doing with them?
He's eating them.
Eating them, like raw.
Yes, raw.
It's really disturbing.
It is. And get this, his father is still visiting him during this time.
And he knows about the rabbits.
Yeah, he sees Chase eating these raw rabbits.
And he doesn't do anything.
Apparently not. It seems like he just accepted it.
Wow. That's hard to believe.
It is, but it might indicate that the family was just completely overwhelmed at this point.
Right, or maybe they were just in denial about how serious his illness had become.
Yeah, and then finally in 1976, he's involuntarily committed again.
Okay, so this is his second hospitalization.
Right.
What leads to this one?
His father finds him in his apartment,
Okay.
and he's really sick.
What's wrong with him?
He's been injecting rabbit blood into his veins.
Injecting rabbit blood.
Yeah, and he's got blood poisoning.
Wow, that's incredibly dangerous.
It is. He's vomiting. He can barely move.
So he's in really bad shape.
Yeah. And when he gets to the hospital, he tells the staff this crazy story about a poisoned rabbit stomach.
It sounds like his delusions are becoming even more bizarre.
Yeah, they definitely are.
So what happens after this hospitalization?
Well, he's transferred to a different psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
This one's called Beverly Manor.
Okay, and is this where he gets the nickname Dracula?
Yes.
Because of his obsession with blood.
Right. He's totally fixated on it.
How does that manifest in the hospital?
Well, he kills birds and drinks their blood.
Inside the hospital?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he even manages to get blood from therapy dogs.
How does he do that?
He steals syringes.
So he's actively seeking out blood.
Yeah, and this is really alarming to the staff.
It should be. It's a huge red flag.
But despite all of this, despite his dangerous behavior,
They release him.
yeah, in late 1976, he's released back into his mother's custody.
Even though the staff is concerned.
Yeah, some of them really disagreed with this decision.
They must have known he was still a danger to himself and others.
It seems like they did, yeah.
But there's probably a lot of pressure to discharge patients.
Right. And resources for mental health care were limited.
Absolutely.
So he's back with his mother.
And what happens then?
Well, this is where things take a really devastating turn.
Oh no, what does she do?
She decides to take him off his medication.
She takes him off his medication.
Yeah, without even consulting a doctor.
Why would she do that?
She didn't like the way it made him look.
Really?
Yeah, she said he was like a zombie.
That's so irresponsible.
It is. It's incredibly dangerous.
And of course, his condition deteriorates.
Rapidly.
And his obsession with blood gets even worse.
Way worse.
So he's back to killing animals.
Yeah, but it's escalated.
He's not just killing them anymore.
No, he's buying puppies.
Puppies.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He hangs them in his apartment.
He hangs them.
Yeah, to drain their blood.
And he drinks the blood.
Yeah, and he eats their organs.
This is horrific.
It is. It's truly horrifying.
And what's his mother doing during all of this?
It's unclear. The sources don't really say.
It's hard to believe she was completely unaware.
Right, but her level of involvement is unknown.
And what about his neighbors? Did they notice anything strange?
Yeah, there's this one neighbor, Dawn Larson. She said she saw him walking around with his mouth just hanging open.
Like in a daze.
Yeah, like he wasn't even there.
Wow.
And she said he would bring animals into his apartment.
Okay.
And then they would just disappear.
That's chilling.
It is. It's really scary.
So he's becoming increasingly detached from reality.
Absolutely.
And increasingly violent.
Yeah, and he's also isolating himself even further.
How so?
He won't even open the door for his mother anymore.
They're just talking through a crack in the door.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
It is. And then in August of 1977, there's this incident in Nevada.
Nevada? What happens there?
He's found naked and covered in blood.
Covered in blood.
Yeah, and he's got a bucket in his truck.
What's in the bucket?
A liver.
A liver?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And he claims that the blood is seeping from his own body.
Like he's literally bleeding.
Yeah. And a dog that was with him is missing.
So they think he might have killed the dog.
Right, but it turns out the blood is actually from a cow.
So he didn't kill the dog.
Well, we don't know for sure.
Right.
Either way, this whole incident is really disturbing.
Absolutely. It's a huge warning sign.
Yeah, it foreshadows the violence that's to come.
So this brings us to December 1977.
Right.
The beginning of his killing spree.
He buys a .22 caliber pistol.
And he lies on the application.
Yeah, he lies about his mental health history.
So he's intentionally trying to get a gun.
Yes.
That's terrifying.
And his neighbors start hearing gunshots coming from his apartment.
What's he shooting at?
He claims he's shooting at voices.
Auditory hallucinations.
Right.
So he's becoming increasingly psychotic.
Yeah, and the police find bullet holes in his walls.
Which seems to support his claim.
Right. But he's also still killing and eating dogs.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he even tries to steal a St. Bernard.
St. Bernard.
Yeah, but he's not successful.
Okay.
And then on December 29th, 1977, he commits his first murder.
His first human murder.
Right.
And who is the victim?
A 51-year-old man named Ambrose Griffin.
How does he kill him?
He shoots him in a drive-by shooting.
A drive-by shooting?
Yeah.
That seems so random.
It does. It seems completely motiveless.
The police must have been baffled.
They were. They had no idea who would do this or why.
So what was Chase's motive?
Well, he later claimed that he was angry at his mother for not letting him come over for Christmas.
Really?
Yeah, and apparently his sister was afraid of him.
Because of the cat incident.
Right, the one where he killed the cat and smeared blood on himself.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
So he's feeling rejected by his family.
And that triggers this rage.
It's possible, yeah.
But the drive-by shooting still seems so impulsive.
It does. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's hard to understand the logic of someone who's so deeply disturbed.
Exactly.
So what happens after he kills Ambrose Griffin?
Well, in the next couple of weeks, there are a few more incidents.
Okay.
He tries to break into a woman's house.
All right.
But he leaves when he finds the doors are locked.
That's strange.
He later tells the police that he sees locked doors as a sign of rejection.
Really?
Yeah, he thinks unlocked doors are an invitation to enter.
That's a really distorted way of thinking.
It is. It's scary.
What else does he do during this time?
He gets caught stealing things from another house.
Okay.
And while he's in the house, he urinates and defecates on a baby's bed.
Oh my God. That's disgusting.
It's horrific.
He's really crossing all kinds of boundaries.
Yeah, and then he breaks into another house that's empty.
Okay.
And he tries to set it on fire.
He tries to set it on fire.
Yeah, he thinks the people who live there are spying on him.
So the paranoia is still a major driving force.
Absolutely.
And it's clear that his behavior is escalating rapidly.
Right. He's becoming more and more dangerous.
And then comes January 23, 1978.
The murder of Teresa Wallen.
Yes.
It's a truly horrific crime.
One of the most disturbing in this case.
He breaks into her house while she's taking out the trash.
Okay.
And he shoots her multiple times.
And then what happens?
Well, this is where the details get really graphic.
Okay.
I'm not sure I can even describe it all.
I understand.
But he basically engages in necrophilia.
Okay.
And really brutal mutilation.
Can you give me any specifics?
He has sex with her dead body.
Oh, God.
He stabs her repeatedly with a kitchen knife.
Jesus.
He removes her organs and rearranges them.
That's so sick.
He cuts off her nipple and drinks her blood from a yogurt cup.
This is beyond comprehension.
And he stuffs dog feces down her throat.
Oh my God, this is monstrous.
It is. It's truly monstrous.
And he's wearing gloves during all of this.
Yes.
But he doesn't clean up the crime scene.
No, he leaves everything as it is.
That's unusual for someone who's trying to avoid detection.
It is. It suggests that he's not really thinking clearly.
Or maybe he wants to be caught.
It's possible.
And what about Teresa Wallen? Was she alive during any of this?
Tragically, yes.
Oh my God.
They found evidence that she was still alive for some of the mutilation.
That's just heartbreaking.
It is. It's absolutely devastating.
Also, she was pregnant.
Yes, 3 months pregnant.
And they found fragments of the fetus at the scene. Yes.
Oh, God, this is so awful.
It is. It's one of the most disturbing aspects of this whole case.
And who discovers her body?
Her husband.
I can't even imagine.
The police who responded to the scene were completely horrified.
I
They
bet.
said it was the most disturbing thing they had ever seen.
And what does Chase do after this?
He goes home and watches TV.
Just like nothing happened.
Yeah, and he even calls his mother.
What do they talk about?
He's rambling about rockets and spaceships.